listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Hey, good morning, Overwatch League fans. This is your Overwatch League Daily episode for April 8th, 2018. I just want to say something right off the bat before we go into anything else. These episodes this week have been long. We've been trying kind of a new format, doing more live interviews, and it's made them go a little bit long, but I think the content's been good enough that, well, I've decided not to go back and pare it down or edit it. But going forward, we will be back to that kind of 15 to 20 minute time slot, so don't you worry. Now let's go ahead and jump into the news. On Friday, LA Valiant and Immortals CEO Noah Winston took part in an AMA on the competitive Overwatch subreddit to address kind of some of the perceived missteps and lingering issues of the organization and also address some of the Valiant topics moving forward. In this AMA, he discussed the now famous in and out scene in the latest LA Valiant video, the Grim Reality's transition to a coaching role, and player fatigue. And I think that's about it. But there is more stuff in that AMA. We don't normally get insights like these from a CEO, so you definitely want to make sure to check it out. And that's why we're bringing it up to you on the show today. Before we move on in the show, I want to briefly introduce a new segment called the 2-Minute Rundown. This segment's going to replace the scoreboard and will include, in 2 minutes or less, the scores and key storylines from the previous day's games. So I already took 15 seconds of that. So here's your 1 minute and 45 second rundown brought to you by patreon.com/OWL Daily Show. So week 1 of stage 3 is in the books, and yesterday held at least 2 important matches as we begin to sprint to the end of the Overwatch League's inaugural season. For the first match of the evening, we have the Florida Mayhem, whose last win was against the Shock on May 21st, go up against the Stage 2 runner-ups Philadelphia Fusion. As the Mayhem continued to integrate Saya player into their lineup, the Fusion are still without EQO. The Mayhem went down 3-0 before winning a close one on Route 66. The Fusion take this one 3-1. For the second match of the evening, the Houston Outlaws look to take on the Boston Uprising. The last time these two teams squared off was in the first week of Stage 2, where the Outlaws would wrangle in the Uprising 4-0. But in this one, the tables would turn as the Uprising would rise above the Outlaws on the back of Dreamcasper and Neko and complete the sweep 4-0. The Uprising are 2-0 for the first week of Stage 3. For the final match of the evening, we had the Stage 2 champion NYXL take on the Stage 1 champion Spitfire. These teams have met 3 times in the past, and all 3 matches went to 5 games, with the Spitfire coming out on top 2 of the 3 times. NYXL have not lost a match since they last played the Spitfire on February 23rd. This match didn't go the way of prior matches, as NYXL would sweep the Spitfire 4-0. An interesting note about the Spitfire is that they've never been swept in Overwatch League so far, and have never started a stage at 0-2. The Spitfire are currently in 10th place in Stage 3, and I know that's a cheesy stat, but it's kind of funny to say, and I don't think we'll get to say it that often, while the NYXL and LA Valiant are in first place at 2-0 with a perfect 8 map wins and 0 map losses. That's your 2-minute rundown. I sat down with Overwatch caster and co-host of Esports Central Genome to discuss yesterday's matches. All right, guys. Hey, I am here with Genome for the last day of the first week of Stage 1. Yeah, I said that right. That was a mouthful. First time we've met in person, by the way. So, hey, good to see. I like the hair. It's
Thanks, man. Leg Day was rocking it for a while in Overwatch Contenders as well before he cut it off. I don't know why he did that, by the way.
I think he fell to peer pressure. A little bit disappointed, but
don't do that. You got to stick with it, man. You got to commit to the hair.
I'm glad you're rocking with it. We've got quite a few things to talk about. We originally planned on spending most of our time today discussing NYXL versus Spitfire, and well, there's still a lot to talk about. The results weren't exactly as close as we had hoped.
Yeah, it's probably not like what we were thinking we were going to talk about, which is like another great battle between them, this kind of like alternate universe, Stage 2 final, which we didn't unfortunately get to see. The Philly match was still pretty good, but yeah, instead we're going to be kind of talking about what happened to Spitfire? Like, where did they go instead, right?
Yeah, so we're definitely going to get to that. I want to talk to you a little bit about Boston versus Houston, though, because that was also a really interesting one, especially on like the Boston side of things, I think. And what I really want to talk about is the Uprising and Assault maps. They're basically legendary. They're basically writing the book right now on how to attack and defend Assault maps. What makes them so good on this map type?
Well, I think the hard thing to talk about that today is that the same reason they did so well today is the same reason that why it's got like not all that much to do with like previous history and like why they've typically done so well on assault maps, because today they brought out something entirely new. Okay, so there was not only like a composition that we'd literally never seen before by them on an assault map, but like Striker, he had literally never touched Junkrat on assault before. I mean, I think there's like 16 minutes total on all map types, but like he'd never ever touched that. So we hadn't seen the Orisa out of them either. There were like all these new things coming out, right? And we know how much these games are dictated by how you can prepare for your opponent. So if you're just looking at Boston and being like, all right, these are the dive guys, we are going to prepare for their dive, because even on assault, typically, like that's what they've played before. Even in stage one, that's what they've played before. So Houston are going to come in, they've watched all this video, they're preparing for like a specific style that Boston have played, and then they just bring out Orisa Junkrat, and you're just like, their mind is blown, they can't adapt fast enough, and yeah, they wind up losing the match. And I think the other thing you should note here is that like we played Temple of Anubis was stage 1, right?
Right.
So these guys have played Temple of Anubis before on stage 1, and they were playing Dive then. Since then, Mercy and Junkrat have both been nerfed, but now when it's like a categorically worse composition, now they're switching to it.
Yeah, they've done that. We've kind of seen Boston do that a little bit, especially towards the end of stage 2 even, when we still had Mercy nerfs. Towards the end of stage 2, they started to go back into, you know what? Mercy's nerfed, but she's still really good for us for whatever reason, which would have been a great question to ask. Like, why is Mercy so good for this comp? But I mean,
and I don't think it's just Boston, right? Like, I think most teams by now have sort of figured this out. They're like, oh, actually, wait,
she's still good.
Everyone does this, including pros, is like they overreact to nerfs, right? They're like, no, they're gone, put them in the bin, never touch them again. And then, suddenly you realize, the nerfs weren't so bad. Like, Res was the best ability ever, sure, but like, we can still do without it.
Right. Well, and they kind of overreact to buffs too. Sombra's broken. We'll never be able to, and we can talk about Sombra a little bit, but I would say so far through 1 week, and again, it usually takes about 2 weeks for the meta to settle kind of anyway. There's a lot of experimentation right away. Sombra hasn't been as oppressive as I felt like I was being led on to believe.
No, I'm having a blank. I can't remember if is Overwatch League using the Contenders patch or the later one where Sombra has like the nerf to her hack.
I believe it's the Contenders patch, or it's the Contenders patch minus Brigitte. That's what Nuki always says. Whenever we talk and ask her, she says it's the Contenders patch minus Brigitte. So I think that's right.
There was a small nerf to Sombra though. So I think I was talking to Gumber about this. He said they had this thing where you could hack people through, like they walk behind a post and you could still hack them. And that's not in Overwatch League Season 3. Like if they break line of sight, I think it has that. So it's a really small thing, but I think it actually makes quite a big difference for Sombra, because you had situations where like you can hack people through recall. Like there's all this really funky stuff that they built in. They tried to make hack a little bit more usable, but at the same time, it just made it super powerful. And obviously, Sombra, like the playstyle is completely different now. You're not trying to get your off tanks and stuff to like charge up your health packs and charge up your ultimate that way. But I think actually they pointed out on broadcast today as well, like it's not just about that. Like denying the opponent's health packs in some situations is actually really powerful, especially on like second point Temple of Anubis. Like how many times are you on the point, like, maybe one of your healers has died, the other healer doesn't have enough bandwidth to kind of give everyone heals at the same time. So you've got to drop down under the bridge, grab the Mega, and then rotate up back to the point. But you can't do that if the Sombra's hacked that. And like things like that can really make a big difference.
We also just talked about when we had Nomi and Dak on the show on Friday. Nina said, at the end of the day, if you're hacked, you're just a punching bag at that point. And that's a really powerful thing. So, you know, Sombra is definitely, it's a scary thing when you have a stealth hacker in a competitive shooter. But I digress. I want to go back and talk about the Boston Uprising, because we've seen a lot of looks from the Boston Uprising. We saw them kind of struggle in the preseason and a little bit at the beginning of stage 1. And then they just turned it up, and, you know, we're one game away from playoffs, right? Was it one game? Yeah, it was one game away from playoffs. They lost to the Outlaws, who played London, lost to London, and then we had NYXL in London.
Good memory, huh?
I get, every time I misremember something, like I just get badgered in the YouTube comments. So I'm like trying really hard not to misspeak here, which is going to just empower them that much more to like nitpick my memory here. But back to Boston, they struggled in the first half of stage 2 again, and then they really kind of stepped it up again. And now they've pretty much been on a tear. Is this the best Boston, whether it's results orientated or just how they're playing? Is this the best Boston that we've seen so far since the beginning of Overwatch League?
I think it is. They've had, in stage 1 and stage 2, as you kind of said, they had really strong finishers. They dropped some maps early, didn't quite make playoffs. And I think what we're seeing now is a Boston who, especially today, the fact that they can throw out some new comps at people means that, one, the opponents don't know exactly what they're doing every time. And that's a big deal. That means they can't just throw the same thing at them. 2, it means they can, the meta does dictate stuff. You can have your own style. You can just try and play dive most of the time, but there's always going to be maps like Control Center for tank comps, or, Lijiang Gardens for Pharah comps. There's always going to be places where it is just statistically straight up the best to play a certain style of Overwatch. And if they can flex out a little bit more and give themselves the options to be playing Orisa compositions and that sort of thing, they're going to be better on those types of maps, and not just the maps that lend themselves to dive.
Right. The way I've kind of thought of the Uprising is that their playstyle, what we saw in the beginning for, I would say, the first stage and probably the first half of the second stage, is outside of some flexing from Dream Casper, we saw some really rigid compositions, right? Dream Casper is kind of their Joker, right? Where it's a wild card. Yeah. And then the rest of the squad kind of stuck in the same. But now we're seeing that change a little bit. They're becoming a little bit more fluid. They're still, in my opinion, one of the most reactive teams, fastest teams to react in Overwatch League. When you watch some of those highlight reels and stuff, or when they break it down for the insights portion of halftime or the end of the match, you'll notice how quickly Boston is to react. So that's funny you say that, actually, because I thought it was Houston who really had a problem being reactive today. There was several maps where they rolled out of the gate with one composition, they just absolutely got smashed, went back into the spawn, 3 members maybe changed over, lost all their ults, and from then they just had a really hard time coming out against Boston because they were so far behind on ult economy, and they were always on the back foot because of that. I guess I will clarify, because I guess what I meant was someone pops an ult, boom, they're in. They move very quick. Maybe it's proactive, or if they're getting dove, they're really quick tactically. I totally agree with you, though. They're not the play on the heels. We've seen Seoul Dynasty do that a couple times now, too, where they've kind of tried to change too much composition-wise before they're just hey, dude, you're freaking lunatic high. Just go 1v1 them. Anyways, I agree. I do think this is the best Boston that we've seen right now, but we have a ton to talk about with NYXL and the Spitfire. And one of the first things I want to talk with you about is kind of specific, but it really kind of caught my eye. And it's that NYXL seems like one of the few teams that are able to run Genji as effectively as they do, particularly talking about Anubis attack. And I'm thinking maybe of like EQO, I guess, with the Fusion is maybe somebody I would say, okay, maybe Fusion does run that a bit better. But first of all, am I remembering this correctly, or is there a team that runs him as effectively or fluidly? And how key was Libero on Genji for this Anubis map?
Yeah, it is a pretty specific question, I guess. The hard thing about answering that is you're kind of just saying like who has the best teamwork, right? Because like in the end, most of that is coming down to that. Like, and NYXL, of course, like they do have the best teamwork. Like that's just not even a question at this point. Today, especially, like I didn't think there was anything special about the way that they were using Libero. Like, you know, if you take the Anubis attack, for example, like they just, they pushed through London Spitfire. Like he was diving very well with Meko. You know, there was a couple of times where I think Mano got picked off, so you only had the two of them executing the dive, and they still managed to get the kills. But like that just came down to his mechanics, his execution. Like he just got a couple of, you know, shuriken headshots. That happens. That means all of a sudden, like they don't get, you know, Junkrat doesn't get a chance to mine himself out of range. He gets the dash resets, all that sort of thing, right? Because like you got to remember, if you're doing like it's 28 damage for shuriken, 50, so that's 56 for a headshot. So what's that, like 168 for if you hit all three shurikens in a headshot?
Nice math,
right?
Nice math, yeah.
Thanks, man. Yeah, yeah, look, Adam Mali to that. That's 198. Like you've almost got him dead. So if you get in there and like hit a couple of shurikens and like honestly like that's just what he did on Anubis today. Like you can tear the push apart. So I don't think there was. I'm sure there's more lurking in the background. But like a lot of it sometimes comes down to dumb luck, right? Like, or not dumb luck, because that's like underselling his mechanical abilities. Genobe says
Libero's Genji is dumb luck. That's what you heard. I'm just kidding. I'm just messing. I know what you're saying though, right? It's like
I don't think he made like any like huge plays today. They just.
Yeah, the only thing that like kind of really stood out to me is the way that they kind of dealt with Widowmaker on their point A defense, right? Where, you know, Genji ends up being really good on that Widowmaker because, you know, if you got a Winston diving you, it's a grapple hook and your dive's on cooldown, and now like you have to wait, and then you just have Widowmaker on the other side sitting in the back and still sniping. With the Genji, you can climb all that. So it kind of makes it interesting to see how we've seen Genji used in that map.
Actually, I guess part of it might be the way that they take space. So the way that they like really methodically clear things. It reminds me of like, you know, Counter-Strike a bit, where you're walking around and you're clearing out every angle before you like move into the next location. And you do see NYXL do that very well with it. Their Tracer and Genji specifically, because they're like the ones who have more mobility, and that, you know, you don't notice them quite as much as like a Diva or a Winston jumping around. So you will see them just like, you know, okay, they're not here. All right, now we're getting closer and closer to them, just inching up to set up that dive and make sure we can do it from like the most optimal position.
Yeah. Something that's been really interesting, because you were just talking about how great the teamwork from NYXL has been so far. And I would agree with you. I don't think there's a better team right now, especially a combination of individual skill with kind of seeing that cohesive team unit, than NYXL right now. But one of those small little blemishes has been Pine recently. We didn't see Pine a lot for stage 2. He's coming back in. He's been having some kind of emotional issues adapting to being away from home and the league schedule. And we've seen this from a lot of players. Pine is not the only one, but we're seeing him come back now. We saw him on Blizzard World, and I'm trying to think, didn't he play Junkrat? Do I remember that right?
Yep. Yeah, he did play with the Junkrat.
Yeah,
Junkrat and Widow mostly, I think it was.
Yeah. It's so, we're seeing him kind of change.
On the Widow.
Yeah. But overall, how have you felt about Pine's performance since coming back?
It definitely hasn't been like the show-stopping stuff that he pulled out in stage 1. And it really sucks when you've got, the anxiety issues or whatever it is specifically that he's got going on. Everyone's feeling for him, but that's his job. Unfortunately, like, he's there to show up on stage, even if it is only for that one map a series that they want to use him, and putting him on Widow and Junkrat. Like, they've got other players who can do that. Like, they've got Libero there. They don't need to sub Pine in for that. So it's interesting that they're using him at all, really. Like, it makes you wonder, are they just putting him in there because they want to try and increase his confidence and get him back up to that place where he can just come in and dominate a game like we saw a couple of times in stage 1. I think this is parroting something that I said in one of the earlier episodes I was on. Like, he had like a, how do you say it? It's like a, not beginner's luck. It's, I really should stop talking about luck this episode.
Pine beginner's luck. Got it.
Like a window. There was a window where he came in, where people weren't as used to his play style. They didn't realize that, he was sort of in all these weird spots and getting out of position.
Kind of that rookie sensationalism a little bit where, like in sports, right? You have this guy who comes in and plays, I'm going to use American football, comes in, plays quarterback and goes 7-0. And next season he's the starter and the team goes like 0-5 in their first thing, where it's like, based on their play style, not having a lot of scouting info on him and stuff. And obviously there's a lot of parallels that apply and don't apply. Yeah, there was that surprise. And mechanically, he is a god, right? I mean, he's... he's, his McCree, that Ilios McCree thing where he, is like
we
dabbing.
Can't just keep talking about that, man. Like, you can't just like rest your laurels on like 5 minutes of godlike play in a whole season. So
that's a good point.
He's got to come back, and he's really got to do something, because like he came in today on Blizzard World and like he did okay. He was trading with Birdring on Widowmaker, which is no mean feat, right? Like, I reckon I'd probably put Birdring as like my top Widowmaker. So the fact that he's competing with him that's fantastic. And he did okay on the Junkrat as well. But like, you're NYXL, like, you can't be doing okay. You have to be absolutely dominating to deserve a place on that team.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. I feel like NYXL is also, because I feel like Libero really didn't get the credit he deserved until like the second or so week of stage 2, right? Where, because he wasn't all that flashy, and then all of a sudden, like, you saw commentators and analysts start really pointing out what Libero is doing for the team.
Yeah,
and so I don't want to say it's a double standard, because like, Libero has been playing this concrete role for a long time, and to your point, I would say he was solid, but he wasn't. It's kind of like in baseball, when you bring in your designated hitter, you don't bring him in to hit at a lower batting average. Then, sorry, another American sports thing. We'll leave that later.
Yeah, it's going over my head, but I'm sure lots of your viewers will know exactly what's happening.
We're done with the sports metaphors.
I'll just start talking about Aussie rules football. Uber will know what I mean, at least.
Yeah, Uber will get it. That'll be our only Australian viewer, by the way. Uber. Let's talk about NYXL for 1 second, though, on Junkertown. They walked the payload down. 4 deaths for their entire offensive push, 354 in the time bank. What went wrong for London there? Or I guess what went right for NYXL?
Well, there's a really interesting comment Zoe brought up at halftime. Like, I love the fact that we get to hear, stuff direct from the source through Zoe in those little halftime interviews, by the way. Like, I always put a lot of stock in those. I mean, hopefully they're telling the truth and not just like trying to throw the other teams off kilter by throwing a red herring out there. But what she said was that they were going for a more passive playstyle, the Spitfire. Okay. And I 100% believe that, because what we saw on both Blizzard World, actually, no, was it? At the very least on Junkertown, we did see a very passive playstyle from from the Spitfire. It was almost like they didn't care about the cart. And I mean, maybe it was game 4 and they were just like, we just got absolutely rolled, and they stopped caring. Like, I am very open to that being a possibility, that the game 4 wasn't important for them here. But you didn't see the main tanks getting on the cart at all. And it was almost like they were saying, okay, if we don't win the start of the fight, like we're just not going to take it at all. Whereas I feel like the prevailing methodology for most teams up to this point is like, unless you have a really early pick from, say, a Widowmaker or a Junkrat Tire or something like that, where it's easy to pull back and regroup as a team, you're still going to pile on there. You're still going to, have people contesting the cards. So at least when the next fight comes in, you've blocked the card's progress for quite some time. But like the Spitfire just didn't do that at all today. Like it was almost like they forgot about the objective. Not talking about backcaps because there's been enough of them recently. But yeah, they just really seem to not want to take the fight unless it was on their terms. And that's just like, it's a bad strategy against NYXL, because they are honestly the best team at like deciding things from that first point. They were also talking about how NYXL is so passive, right? And that's because what they do is they will sit behind their tanks, especially will make sure that when they take that first engagement, it is pushed up quite close to some sort of terrain, so that they are still in line of sight of their healers, but the opposition are not, especially when they're on the defense, right? Because they can control this sort of thing. So we saw it on Blizzard World quite a lot. They like playing behind that siege tank and then forcing the others to dive into them, where it's always going to be more beneficial for them.
So I've got one more question for you, and this one, it's a little bit more speculative, so I'm not going to hold you to this answer. I don't think you have inside information. There's no amount of analysis probably that prepares us for this, but we saw London run Hureg, Hagapun, and Wuyal a lot in this one, and usually when we see substitutions made for even playmakers, it's because they play a specific hero better, right? Like you see, Snillo playing Tracers so that Carpe can play Widowmaker or something like that.
Sure.
But I'm searching for some sort of sane answer here as to why we saw these players playing against the best team in the league, or is this something that Korean teams do? Because we saw Seoul Dynasty kind of do the same thing against the Valiant earlier in the week. Like, is there something in the coaching there? Otherwise, Abby, do you have a theory?
I've got theories.
Give me a theory.
I am just as bewildered as everyone else, but like I do have theories. I mean, like one of them was they've got so much faith in Birdring that they assume they can just like put him next to some plat players and he's still going to carry them, so that they just don't care what they're doing. They're just putting any old team member next to Birdring and being like, okay, sure. It's not working, is it? Really? Maybe it's a Korean culture thing. Maybe they're just, these players aren't happy sitting on the sidelines, and
that's how they lost Fissure.
Yeah, right. So maybe they want them to get, like they're saying, we're not going to play our best. Like we're just going to ask for a trade or something. Or if we're not getting any stage time, maybe there's some kind of pressure in the background there. Because if you look at a team like NYXL, they're only getting better because they're using their best players all the time. Admittedly, they do have a smaller roster than these other Korean teams. They've only got, I think it's only like 9 players on NYXL at the moment. But they're sticking with their core, sometimes swapping in Janus for Mano and that sort of thing. But they're just getting better and better because they're sticking as a team. They know exactly how each other works. They've got that teamwork going on. And the Spitfire are getting worse and worse. And it just feels like they're falling further and further behind because they insist on using these, like, just so obviously worse players. I mean, you just can't make arguments about how Hagapun is getting time over Bodosin, Wuya, like maybe, and then who's the Farah today? Hureg. What like maybe you chuck him in for a Farah map, but even then, they took out Birdring for the last map. I mean, that is the point where you just like hit the red button and go no more.
Well, and they did have in London's defense, they did have a tough week. They had the Houston Outlaws, right, who are teams I believe they're 0-2 against right now. And then, they have NYXL, who before this, they were 2-1 against. So they actually had a better winning record against NYXL than they did against Outlaws. And so, I mean, maybe there's some aspect of like,
this is a big game, Kick. This is where you have to put in your best roster. No questions asked.
I agree.
And pull out the win, man.
There's too many, like, it's kind of like many, like, Hail Marys. It's like, Hail Mary. Yeah. Sorry, another sports analogy. I'll stop.
That's a global one.
That one. Okay, that one is global. It's like doing a Hail Mary when you're in scoring position. You're like, yeah, you could have just ran the ball.
The only other thing I could think of, which is something I thought at the start of the season, I actually theorized might be a good thing, is that if you've got the 12 players and you are practicing between yourselves and you literally split the map pool or perhaps even your opponents throughout the weeks down your two teams, right? And you say, okay, these guys will practice these two maps, these guys will practice these two maps, or you just say these guys practice against Boston, these guys practice against NYXL, okay? But what we've seen is that it doesn't work. You have players like Birdring, he's always the better player. There is no other DPS on Spitfire that you can substitute for any map, for any opponent, where you will get a better result out of playing them than playing Birdring. Like, you just have to do it.
We've seen some success with teching for specific heroes in hero comps, but we haven't seen a whole lot of success teching against teams, or not even like teching against teams, but like doing, as you're saying, right? You three take NYXL this week. You three are worrying about London Spitfire. And I think, I don't want to put words in like Reinforce's mouth, but it's something that he's talked about a lot on his Twitter, is the idea that a lot of people think, and Overwatch is a strategically deep game, no doubt about it, but it's really surprising from his perspective as a player how much of it is instinctual, and then people draw a narrative based on what happened rather than like be like, nah, he's just playing to his instinct, man. He sees the goalpost and he's running, not well, if in case A, B, and C happen, then they have like 3 levels of strategy behind on how to adjust.
I feel like there is a bit more to that, though. Like, I definitely agree with him saying that, sometimes people will try and, like, analysts, I'll come out and say, oh, well, this is the reason he did this, when, it was instinctual. But the reason these players are so good is because their instincts are backed up by practice, by having these conversations
100%.
Beforehand, right? So it might be instinctual, but it might just be instinctual because they've had this talk with their coach about, like, this is this way that you approach a situation. So they might not be like thinking like everything that happens during that play, but somewhere in there they've had the practice so that this becomes that becomes like a set play from that, becomes something that they do instinctually. It might not start like that, though.
I totally agree. Genome, we got to get out of here. Thank you so much for coming by and stopping by. It was good to do this live with you, because I like that you can disagree with me live. You know what I'm saying?
Look, there's been so many great guests lately, so it's my absolute pleasure to be on here with you. Thanks, man.
Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. My thanks to Genome for stopping by on the show today. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at GenomeGG. On Wednesday, I don't really know who we're going to have, but I think it's going to be an exciting one either way. So just make sure to tune in for that. That's going to do it for another week of Overwatch League Daily. We've been doing this since November 29th. Can you believe it or not? If you like the show, follow, like, subscribe, all those good things. Just go to overwatchleaguedaily.com. I've got links to everything there. Our Twitter's at Overwatch League, our Twitter's OWL Daily Show, and our Discord is discord.me/OWL Daily Show. That's going to do it for this episode. I'll be back on Wednesday with another one.